Welcome back to another chilling episode of Horror Story. Got a terrifying tale of your own? Send it in for a chance to be featured in our next episode. The best story of the week wins an Amazon gift card, so hit the subscribe button, smash like, and share your most spine-tingling horror experience with us. Now, let's begin the stories. I wasn't supposed to be at Deadwood Lookout. That's the part that gets me now. My assignment had originally been up north, closer to Glacier, but a last-minute reshuffling and a flu outbreak among the senior rangers meant they needed anyone to fill in for a short stretch in the southern sector. It was only supposed to be 3 weeks. I just graduated from the Forest Service Academy and was hungry for field work. When they asked, I didn't hesitate. I remember thinking it sounded romantic, watching the forest for fires, alone in a wooden tower above the trees, with nothing but a radio and my thoughts. I packed light, took my dad's old hiking boots, a Polaroid camera I got at a thrift store, and a box of spiral notebooks. I wanted to write about everything. Looking back though, I should have been more careful about what I wished for. The other rangers called it Deadwood like it was a joke, but there was something cold behind their laughter. I only half noticed at the time. Everyone seemed relieved not to be the one going. One guy, Garrett, pulled me aside before I left. He was older, deep smoker's voice, sunburned skin. He said, "Don't stay past dusk if you're off shift. Just trust me." Then he patted my shoulder like he was saying goodbye for real. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The drive to the trailhead took me over for hours. I had to leave my truck and hike the last 2 miles uphill, hauling a heavy-duty pack full of supplies. Deadwood Lookout was perched at the edge of a rocky cliff, facing an endless sea of trees that stretched west toward Idaho. It was beautiful, quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, just untouched. The kind of place you imagine when you want to disappear for a while. But the tower itself, it looked older than I expected. I knew it had been built back in the 1940s, but no one had mentioned how much it felt that old. Every step on the wooden staircase creaked like bones shifting. The windows were foggy with age. The solar panels on the roof looked patched together with duct tape and hope. I found a half-burned logbook in the drawer under the desk entries going back years, but nothing recent. No cell signal, of course. Just a radio link to the ranger station down in Fairview, which crackled every few minutes with weather updates, and the occasional message from someone named Marcy. I was told to check in 3 times a day, morning, noon, and dusk, always at those times, no exceptions. At the time, I assumed it was just a strict protocol. Now, I'm not so sure. The first night was peaceful. I made it some ramen on the camp stove, took a few Polaroids of the sunset, and journaled about how lucky I felt. It was the kind of solitude people pay thousands for at retreats. By midnight, I'd started reading a paperback I found on the shelf, something about wildfire safety. That had doodles in the margins. I thought it was funny. Human. Then, around the AM, I heard something outside the tower. Just a snap of a branch, a heavy one. I told myself it was a deer. The days passed in a kind of slow, dreamy rhythm. I got up with the sunrise, made instant coffee that tasted like ash, and walked the perimeter with a pair of binoculars slung around my neck. There was something deeply calming about the routine. Scan for smoke, mark temperatures, log wind direction, and call into Fairview every few hours. Nothing fancy, but it gave each day a kind of shape, a framework to hang my thoughts on. The forest stretched for miles in every direction, painted in layers of green and shadow. And in those early days, I felt like the only person alive. And it didn't scare me. Not yet. Inside the lookout tower, I made the place mine. I tacked up some postcards I'd brought from home, hung a string of battery-powered fairy lights around the upper rafters, and cleaned out the dusty desk drawers. There were little things left behind by previous rangers, and old harmonica, a lucky coin taped under the radio, a copy of a mice and men with water damage, and a note in the front cover that just said, "For the long nights." I like those touches. They made the tower feel lived in, like I wasn't really alone, just next in line. I even started a new journal, labeling it Deadwood Log. Caroline B in big block letters on the front page. Felt official. The tower had its quirks. The floor slanted slightly to the left, so any pen I dropped would roll into the same back corner. The wind howled at night like it had a grudge, moaning through the slats and around the beams until it sounded almost like voices. But I chalked that up to acoustics and thin walls. It was an old building in the middle of nowhere. After all, What did start to get to me was how quiet the radio got after dark. Marcy always checked in like clockwork during the day, but after dusk, it was static, no messages, no chatter. When I asked about it during one of the check-ins, she just said, "We go quiet at night up there." Less confusion. That seemed odd, but I didn't push. I figured maybe the signal dropped after sunset. Maybe everyone just got tired. Still, the silence made the darkness feel thicker somehow. I started taking Polaroids during my evening walks. There was this one trail just past the tower that curved down into a ravine lined with birch trees. I took a picture of the clearing. Just before the sun disappeared, the trees glowing pale gold. I pinned that photo to the wall by my bed, next to a sketch I did of the tower's floor plan. Each night, I added one more picture, trying to document the quiet life I was building in the clouds. And it was quiet, no animals, no planes overhead, no hikers passing through. That should have been peaceful, but there was something, too, quiet, like the woods were waiting for something. Still, I told myself not to get spooked. It was just the way wilderness worked. A few days in, I found a small metal box buried under the supply shelf. It was wedged behind a stack of fire maps, almost hidden. Inside were the things, a roll of film still in its canister, and a small, rusted key. No label, no note. I stared at that key for a long time, wondering if it belonged to a drawer I hadn't found yet, or maybe an old lockbox. I checked everywhere, every compartment, even the trap door that led to the underfloor storage. Nothing. I kept the key on a nail near the window, figuring maybe it was just left behind by someone who forgot it. That's what I told myself anyway. The night stayed mostly calm. I cooked by flashlight, read books by lantern, and scribbled long entries into my journal pages about the air, the trees, the strange peace of being forgotten by the world. I didn't even notice that I hadn't seen another living soul since I arrived. Not a ranger, not a hiker, not even an animal on the trail cams, but it felt like a gift back then, like a sacred pause before the rest of my life began. Looking back though, I wonder if the silence wasn't a warning, if I was never meant to be comfortable here, if the forest was just letting me get used to the cage before it shut the door. It started with the boots. I always placed them by the trapdoor, muddy side down, laces tucked in. It was part of my routine, something that made the space feel more like mine. But on the morning of day 10, they were gone. Not just misplaced, gone. I checked under the cot, in the understorage, behind the stove, even outside the tower in case I'd somehow forgotten them on the landing. Nothing. It made no sense. I'd worn them the night before, then taken them off just like always. I ended up spending the whole day in my backup hair holder to tight, rubbed the back of my ankles raw. I chalked it up to fatigue. Maybe I'd moved them and forgotten. Maybe an animal dragged them off, though I hadn't seen any animals since I got there. Still, something about it stuck with me, felt wrong in a way I couldn't name. Later that same day, the radio glitched. My morning check-in went fine, but the noon call, silence. I tried again. Nothing. Just a steady, low hum that almost sounded like a voice trying to push through, but never forming words. I waited 10 minutes, then tried again. Still nothing. Around 1:30, it crackled to life with Marcy's voice, strained and clipped. "We're receiving you. Repeat. All clear." Then silence again. When I asked if they'd had issues on their end during the dusk check-in, Marcy said, "We had a brief outage. Solar relay sometimes acts up. Nothing to worry about." Her voice sounded tired, like she'd said it before. Maybe she had. Still, I logged the outage in my notes, underlining it twice. That night, I noticed the countdown. It was etched faintly into the lower beam by the back window, partially obscured by an old canteen someone had nailed up as a coat hook. The numbers read 4. That was it. Just a 4, scratching with something sharp. I assumed it was a marker left by a past ranger, maybe counting days until pickup, or some kind of fire patrol reference. I didn't think too hard about it. Not then. But the next morning, the number had changed. It read 3. I stared at it for a long time, fingers running over the grooves, fresh to fresh. The wood was clean. No dust settled in the scratch. I hadn't changed it. No one else was here. At least, no one I could see. That was the first night I had trouble sleeping. Every creak of the beams felt heavier, deeper, like something big shifting its weight beneath me. I pulled the covers up to my chin and told myself I was being silly, just isolated. Cabin fever. Even if the cabin had 360-degree windows, But just as I started to doze, I heard it again, that same sound from the first night, a branch snapping, then another, heavy, deliberate, too loud for a deer. I grabbed my flashlight, crept to the window, and scanned the clearing below. Nothing, just the trees swaying, dark as ink, as if they were watching me back. I told myself it was wind. It had to be wind. But wind didn't leave footprints. The next morning, I found something under the trapdoor, a page from my journal, not an old one, a fresh sheet, torn clean from the middle, the handwriting mine, only I hadn't written it. The date was correct, the words familiar, but the content, it was wrong. The entry talked about someone knocking on the trapdoor at 3:17 a.m. and how I'd opened it. I hadn't. I was sure I hadn't. I didn't even hear knocking. But now, with the page in my hands, I wasn't so sure. My fingers trembled as I compared. The ink to the pen I used, same color, same pressure, same messy loops on the lowercase y. Was I sleepwalking, writing things I didn't remember? Or was something trying to gaslight me into thinking I was losing my mind? That's when it hit me. I wasn't just alone. I was being watched. When I radioed Marcy that day, I asked her if anyone had reported strange behavior from this tower before. She went quiet for a second, then said, "What kind of strange?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound crazy. I mentioned the missing boots, the journal page, the changing number. She paused again, then said, "Deadwood's been around a long time. Every ranger has a different story. Try not to let the quiet mess with your head. You'll be out soon." It sounded like a brush off, polite, firm, but what stuck with me was how rehearsed it sounded, like she'd said those exact words to someone else before, maybe more than once. Later that evening, I took another Polaroid, aiming it toward the tree line. Just before bed, I shook the picture and let it develop, expecting nothing more than darkness and outlines. But when it cleared, I froze. In the photo, near the edge of the clearing, there was a figure, just barely visible. No details, just the faint outline of a person standing perfectly still between two trees. I rushed to the window, scanning the exact spot. No one. I flipped the photo over and wrote, 8:46 p.m., figure by tree line, in red pen, then slid it under my pillow. I didn't sleep much after that, after the photograph. I started closing the shutters at night. It didn't help. No matter how tightly I sealed them, the wine door or whatever was out there found its way in. I'd lie in bed and listen to it groan through the wood, pushing under the floorboards, rattling a tin stovepipe like fingers dragging along metal. One night, I swear I heard breathing. Not wind. Breathing. Slow and wet, as if something was crouched just under the trapdoor, matching its rhythm to mine. I sat upright, clutching my flashlight, staring at the floor for hours until the pale light of morning crept through the slats. When I finally opened the trapdoor with a crowbar in one hand, the space below was empty. Still, the floor was damp. I hadn't spilled anything. There was no leak, just a slow, sticky patch of moisture spreading out like a handprint. I kept finding things moved. Small at first. My toothbrush turned sideways. The lid on the coffee tin opened when I swore I'd sealed it. Then it escalated. My journal, always stored under my pillow, went missing entirely on day 13. I tore the place apart looking for it. I even climbed down the stairs in my socks, thinking maybe I'd carried it outside without realizing. Nothing. But that night, when I opened the old ration crate to grab a flashlight battery, there was my journal sitting perfectly in the center of the box, every page intact. Only one thing had changed. A page near the back now had a single word written in block letters. Soon. I didn't write that. I know I didn't write that. The handwriting was different. Neat. Surgical. The kind of printing you see on tote. Tags in a morgue. The number on the beam changed again. It now read 1. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even looked at it for 2 days, trying to pretend it wasn't real. But now, it stared back at me like a clock I couldn't stop. I checked every tool in the tower. No fresh metal shavings. No scratches on the knife blade. No sign that someone had etched it during the night. The marquee was cleaner this time. Deeper. Like it had been carved with intent. I tried to radio Marcy again. Told her the weirdness was getting worse. But this time the static lasted longer. When her voice finally came through, it was distorted. Like something was mimicking her. Calm. Protocol. Full cycle. Those were the only words I made out before the radio went silent. When I tried to call back, nothing responded. Not even static. Just dead air. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner with the flashlight pointed at the trapdoor and the crowbar across my lap. Every so often, I'd hear a creak on the stairs, just one or two steps, and then nothing. Like someone wanted me to know they were there, but not give me the satisfaction of proof. I checked the stairs 3 times that night. No footprints, no broken branches, just that eerie sense of being watched, like someone was holding their breath. Just outside the glass, at 3:17 a.m., the exact time from that false journal entry, I heard 3 knocks, slow, measured, coming from beneath the trapdoor. I didn't open it. I just whispered, no, over and over until the sun rose the next day. I started packing. I didn't care if I had for more days. I didn't care if I lost the temporary ranger assignment. Something was wrong here, and whatever it was didn't want me leaving. I tossed my gear into my pack, grabbed my remaining Polaroids, and went to double-check the supply crate before heading out. That's when I found the journal. Not my journal, but an older one with yellowed pages and the initial CB. Etched on the inside cover, it had been shoved behind the crate, wedged so deep I had to pull the back panel off to reach it. As soon as I touched it, I knew this had belonged to another ranger, one who hadn't made it out. The first few pages were neat, tidy, notes about daily check-ins, fire weather, local flora. Then the entries got shaky, panicked. The last line was just one sentence, scrawled with such pressure that it tore through the paper. I see IT now. That was the day I stopped pretending this was all in my head. I radioed Fairview that afternoon, told them I was cutting my assignment short and coming down. The voice that answered didn't sound like Marcy. It sounded like static straining to imitate her, like someone pressing words through broken teeth. Stay put. You're not cleared to descend. Deadwood is still in cycle. I dropped the mic. I didn't respond. I just sat there, clutching the old journal in one hand, my Polaroid camera in the other. When I lifted the lens to take a shot of the clearing again, the camera jammed. The photo spat out anyway, half exposed, in a blur of chemicals and shadows. I could make out for silhouettes standing at the edge of the trees, all facing the tower. All still, all wrong. I waited until daylight before I started tearing the place apart. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't just scared anymore, I was sure. There was more to this place than creaking floorboards and backwoods folklore. That second journal, I found CB. The initials haunted me. It couldn't be coincidence. I flipped through the pages again with fresh eyes, scanning for names, dates, anything I'd missed the first time. And there it was, hidden halfway through the book, a torn corner of a photograph. Taped between the entries, a girl in ranger gear, blurry, smiling awkwardly in front of the same lookout tower. Scribbled in red pen along the edge were the words, Caroline Brandt, 1997. My stomach dropped. That name, I knew it. It had been buried somewhere in the back of my head since training. A missing ranger, vanished during her first season on Deadwood. No trace ever found. Until now. The next entry after her name chilled me more than anything I'd experienced so far. They watched from the trees, the same 4, always the same, faces smudged like oil on glass. No sound when they move, only wind. I slammed the book shut. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might split my ribs. For figures, the same number I'd seen in my distorted Polaroid. I checked the date of the entry, October 14th, 1997, exactly 25 years ago, to the day. The next few pages descended into panic, her writing slanted and wild. She mentioned voices in the radio, not static, voices whispering things she couldn't repeat. There was a countdown to, just like mine. She even drew it on the page, the numbers scratched into her sketches of the tower. I flipped to the last entry. It wasn't dated. It wasn't even words. Just black scribbles covering the page, pressed so hard the ink bled through 5 sheets. I knew what it meant. She'd seen something, and whatever it was, it had taken her before she could warn anyone else. I ran outside and threw up over the railing. The trees stared back at me like rows of silent judges. I felt eyes everywhere, but no movement. The woods were still, to still. I rushed back inside and locked the trap door, then shoved the old journal into my pack. If I was losing my mind, fine, but I wasn't going to do it alone. I needed answers, real ones, the kind that only came from maps and records. I yanked open the bottom drawer of the desk and started flipping through old survey charts. Most were water damaged or sun bleached, but one was tucked into a manila envelope marked closed not for rotation. It was dated 1977. It showed the Deadwood Tower, but also for smaller structures marked with X's in the surrounding forest. Unnamed, no trails, No fire breaks leading to them, like someone didn't want them found. I traced the location of the nearest X with my finger. If the scale was right, it wasn't far less than a mile east. The elevation dropped into a deep ravine I hadn't explored. I knew the smart thing to do would be to stay put, call for an evac, wait for backup. But the radio hadn't worked in days. My boots were gone. I had nothing but stubbornness and the weight of someone else's unfinished story pressing against my back. I grabbed my spare shoes, the Polaroid, the protein bars, and the compass from my emergency kit. Then I slipped down the tower ladder and into the trees. The moment I stepped off the platform, the forest swallowed the light. It was like walking into a cathedral built from rot and silence. Even the birds didn't sing. It took me almost 2 hours to reach the spot marked on the map. What I found wasn't a structure not anymore. It was a pit, a shallow depression lined with rotten wood, barely visible under layers of moss and leaves. But what made my skin crawl was what I saw just above it. A wooden sign, hanging crooked, on a rusted nail. Post 3. The lettering was faded but legible. There were no posts 1, 2, or 4 on the map, only this one. I knelt beside the edge and saw something reflecting from beneath the debris. I reached down and pulled out a rusted nameplate, bent and flaking. The engraved letters were barely visible, but I could just make out. Brand. My knees buckled. She'd been here. Caroline Brand had ended up in this hole, and no one ever came looking deep enough to find her. I stumbled back to the tower in a daze, half hoping I'd hallucinated it all. But when I climbed the stairs and opened the door, everything inside had changed. My belongings were rearranged. The photos from the wall were gone. The journal was sitting open on the desk again, Caroline's journal. But this time, there was a new entry, one I hadn't seen before. Watcher wakes when the cycle turns. One every decade. Deadwood feeds. The roots. That sentence repeated over and over again down the page until it faded into illegible scratches. And right there on the last line, just before the ink gave out, she had written the date, October 17th. Tomorrow. 1 day left. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the radio clicking on by itself. No voice, no weather update, just static. Then, slowly, like someone tuning an ancient dial, a voice began to form low, garbled, almost human, but not quite. My name came through first. Caroline, then again, clearer this time. Caroline Brand. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't said that name aloud, not once since finding her journal. I backed away from the radio, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to run. Then the voice changed. Next, it said, over and over. Next, next, next. I lunged at the power switch and yanked the cord. The radio kept playing. I slammed it with the crowbar until the casing split and the static finally died. But the silence that followed felt worse. It was like I'd broken the only barrier holding something back. I locked every window, every hatch. I even pushed the desk in front of the trapdoor, as if that would stop whatever had been climbing those stairs at night. My calls to Fairview went unanswered. I tried the emergency frequency, nothing. Not even a hiss of interference. I was off the map now, and whatever watched from the trees had stopped hiding. Just before noon, I saw actual movement from the tower's west window. A figure, tall and slow, stepped between the trees at the clearing's edge. No details, no face, just a shape, dark as charcoal and wrong in how it walked to smooth, like joints bending the wrong way. I grabbed my camera and took a shot, but the Polaroid came out pitch black, like something had absorbed the light before it hit the film. Then another figure appeared to the north, and another to the south. They were surrounding the tower, waiting, watching. I hit the panic beacon. It was an old device, probably hadn't been tested in years, but it was the only thing left that might reach someone. The red light blinked twice, then went solid. That meant the signal had gone through. I stared at that blinking light like it was the last candle in a blackout. Then I waited. Hours passed. No helicopter, no voice, no help. The forest didn't even pretend to move with the wind anymore. It was dead still, like time itself was, holding its breath. Then, just after sunset, I heard footsteps reel, heavy ones on the stairs. Not cautious, not testing the boards like before. These were confident, slow, coming straight for the hatch. I pressed my back to the far wall, crowbar raised, flashlight shaking in my hand. The trapdoor creaked once, then a voice came through. Caroline. But it wasn't a question. It was a statement, a fact, a declaration from something that knew who I was, even if I didn't know how. I didn't open the hatch. I couldn't. Instead, I screamed, a raw, primal scream, hoping maybe anyone nearby would hear. That's when the radio sparked back to life, even though it was still broken and half smashed. Evac team en route, it said in a robotic tone. Hold position, evac en route. Hold, over and over. I didn't trust it. I didn't believe it. But I held my breath and waited. 30 minutes later, I heard a helicopter in the distance. Then voices, real ones, barking my name, shouting coordinates. I shoved the desk aside and kicked open the trapdoor, crowbar in hand, eyes wild. 2 men in ranger jackets rushed the stairs, eyes wide when they saw me. They grabbed my arms, asked if I was injured. I couldn't even speak. I just pointed to the tree line, where the figures had been. They were gone. Nothing there but the trees, swaying gently again, like the world had resumed its spin. They put me in the chopper and didn't ask many questions. Just 1 or 2. Had I been alone the entire time? Did I ever leave the tower? I answered, numbly, that I'd found a journal, Caroline Brandt's journal. That name changed everything. The older of the 2 rangers tensed. The younger one cursed under his breath. The older man finally said, that wasn't supposed to be left up there. It was supposed to be sealed. That's when it hit me. They knew. They knew all along. I stared at him, waiting for more, but he just looked out the window and said, nothing else for the entire flight. Well, we landed. They took the journal from my bag without asking, said it was classified, but I remembered every page, every word, every drawing. It was seared into my brain like smoke on clothes. They offered me leave, told me it was probably stress, fatigue, hallucinations brought on by the altitude. But I knew the truth. I saw what I saw. I heard what I heard. And when I returned to my apartment 3 days later, there was a package waiting for me, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, not one I'd taken. This one showed the Tower Deadwood lookout just after sunset, windows lit, and a figure standing inside. At the window, looking out, the silhouette wasn't mine. On the back of the photo was a number scratched into the paper, 9. The countdown had started again, and this time, I wasn't up there, but someone else was, and they were already being watched. It's been 3 months since I came down from Deadwood, but the nightmares haven't stopped. They all follow the same shape. I'm back in the tower, alone, but it's not how I left it. The room stretches longer than it should. The corners shift when I blink, and outside the windows are silhouettes that don't move, don't breathe, don't blink. In a dream, the radio hisses with a static that sounds like breathing, and the journal is always open on the desk, pages flipping on their own. Then I see the final page, and it's blank except for one word, you. That's when I always wake up, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like I've run for miles. The taste of pine sap sharp in my mouth. I've tried to move on, to rationalize, but every time I close my eyes, I feel the tower calling me back like unfinished business waiting to be buried again. I've tried to talk to someone about it, therapists, colleagues, even an old ranger who worked the Montana sector back in the 80s. Most of them listen politely and suggest trauma, stress responses, maybe even exposure to carbon monoxide or long-term isolation symptoms. But none of those explain the photographs I still have, the figures in the Polaroids, the countdown scratched into the wood, or the fact that Caroline Brandt's name doesn't appear in any public Forest Service records anymore. I checked. I dug. She's been erased, scrubbed like she never existed, but I held her journal in my hands. I saw the place where she scratched her name into the floorboard beneath the stove. I remember that nameplate I found in the woods. I know she was real, and I'm starting to wonder how many others were, too. How many names were taken off the list so this cycle could continue unnoticed? 2 weeks ago, I got an envelope in the mail. No stamp, no postmark, just slid under my apartment door sometime during the night. Inside was a Polaroid, another one I didn't take. It showed my apartment building from across the street, my window circled in red ink. On the back, someone had written, 1, that number again, that countdown. I tried reporting it, but the officer who came to check barely gave it a glance, said it was probably a prank. Maybe someone online, maybe a disgruntled friend. I could tell he didn't believe me. He looked at me the same way the others had, with that careful distance reserved for the unstable. But that night, I nailed my window shut and shoved a dresser in front of the door anyway, just in case, because I remembered what Caroline's last page said, the one no one else got to read before it was taken away. It doesn't need the forest anymore. It follows the ones who see it. I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. Since then, I've started seeing things in reflections faces that don't belong to anyone I know, always watching from the background. Once, I caught one behind me in the glass door of the fridge, pale, open eyes. No mouth, just a suggestion of something human twisted wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the hallway until the sun came up. Some mornings, I wake up and objects in my apartment have moved the same way. They did in the tower. My key's on the wrong hook. My shoes pointed toward the door instead of the closet. My toothbrush missing for 2 days before reappearing in the freezer. Every time I tell myself it's sleepwalking, stress, my mind playing tricks. But I don't believe that anymore. Something came back with me. Something followed. And it hasn't finished what it started. Last night, the radio on my bedside table turned on at exactly 3:17 a.m. I haven't used it in weeks. Haven't even touched it. But the knob twisted on its own. And the voice that came through wasn't music. It was a countdown. Slow, clear. For 3, 2. I ripped the cord out of the wall. But the voice kept going. 1. Then silence. And I swear I felt someone exhale behind me. I spun around, no one was there. Nothing visible. But the air was colder, thicker, like something invisible had just stepped out of my shadow. I didn't sleep. I just sat up until dawn, heart pounding, waiting for the final number. But it never came. Maybe that's the worst part. Not knowing what comes after one. Not knowing if I'm already on the list. Or if someone else has taken my place. This morning, there was a package outside my door. Inside was a weathered ranger patch like the kind we wore in training, same stitching, same faded green. But this one was different. The name stitched beneath it didn't say mine. It said brand. I dropped it like it burned. It's sitting on my counter now, daring me to pick it back up. The cycle isn't over. It never ends. Every 10 years, someone vanishes. And now I know why no one remembers them, because the forest doesn't just take you. It rewrites you, erases you from the world like you never existed. But if that's true, then why do I remember Caroline? Why do I still have these photos? Unless that's part of it. Unless I'm not supposed to forget. Unless I'm the one chosen to remember this time. To carry the story, to pass it on. And maybe that's how it spreads. Not through the woods, but through the telling. Through people like me. So if you're hearing this, reading this, thinking this is just another scary story someone made up for the internet, don't dismiss it. Because that's what it wants. It wants you to forget. It wants you to laugh, to scroll past, to go to sleep thinking it was nothing. But it's not. It's real. It's still counting. And if you ever wake up to find a Polaroid on your doorstep, your window circled in red, a number on the back, do not look outside. Whatever you do, don't look outside. Because it's already there. And this time, it remembers you, too. I know how ridiculous this sounds. I do. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times. And every time I try to explain it out loud, it comes across like something from a conspiracy board or a late-night horror podcast. But this really happened. And the worst part is, it didn't start as something terrifying. It started with a podcast. A stupid, overproduced, true crime podcast about unsolved medical scandals. My older brother, Nathan, was obsessed with it. He listened to it every morning on his way to work, had their merch, even donated monthly just to get bonus episodes. The show was called Exhume, and their tagline was digging up the bodies they tried to bury. Cheesy, I know, but that was Nathan, always diving headfirst into these dark rabbit holes, thinking he was going to uncover something no one else had. For years, it was harmless. But then he found the sleep experiment episode, and that changed everything. The episode aired in early March season 4, episode 7. I remember because he called me right after it dropped, buzzing with excitement. They covered Pine Hills. He said, "You remember that place, right? The old psych facility off Route 9. I did. Everyone in upstate New York did. It was the kind of place that haunted local legends for decades, stories about patients disappearing, staff going missing, and sealed wings that were never explained. The official record said it shut down in 1984 after funding cuts and structural issues, but people always said there was more to it. That's what the episode claimed to prove. The host, Maureen Cross, said they'd uncovered files, real documents about an off-the-books program called Operation Threshold. Wakefulness studies, she said, no sleep for 30 days, conducted on 5 prisoners in a locked wing of Pine Hills. That's where things started to spiral for Nathan. He wasn't content just hearing about it. He wanted to see it for himself. We grew up not far from the place, maybe 20 minutes. So when he asked me to drive out there with him, I didn't think twice. We'd done stuff like this before: urban exploration, local haunts, abandoned sites. It was our thing. I figured we'd get some creepy photos, maybe find a broken gurney or old medicine bottles, and call it a night. I didn't know he'd been talking to someone from the podcast. He only told me when we were halfway there. Martin's assistant sent me coordinates. He said, like that was totally normal. Not to the main hospital, this is. To the lower level wing they never opened to the public. The one that burned. I laughed it off at first, called him a nerd, but something in his voice was different. Serious. Focused. He wasn't chasing a thrill anymore. He was chasing answers. The coordinates led us to a narrow gravel road overgrown with vines and fallen branches. It didn't look like anyone had driven it in years. We had to ditch the car halfway up and hike the rest on foot, ducking under rusted fencing and pushing through tangles of underbrush. The air felt heavier the closer we got, like the trees themselves didn't want us there. Finally, we found it. Not the main building, but a separate concrete structure buried into a hillside. The metal door had no markings, just rust patterns that almost looked like veins. Nathan was already filming by then, GoPro strapped to his chest, holding his phone out for backup video. He looked thrilled. I just felt uneasy. We pried the door open with a tire iron and stepped inside. The smell hit us first. Mildew, rot, something metallic underneath. Not blood, exactly, older than that. Like old pennies left in water too long. Inside, the air was thick and stale. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, and the walls were covered in peeling lead paint that curled like dried skin. There were no gurneys, no stretchers, no signs of life, just long, narrow halls with strange markings on the floor, circles drawn in chalk, broken arrows pointing to nowhere, and at least 3 doors that had been welded shut from the outside. The place felt less like a hospital and more like a tomb. Nathan led the way, talking to the camera like we were on a ghost hunting show. We are officially inside what may have been the most illegal medical project in New York State history, he whispered. I wanted to leave. I didn't say it yet, but the air felt wrong, heavy in my lungs, like I was inhaling something I shouldn't. That's when we heard the first sound. Not footsteps, something softer, a shuffle, maybe like bare feet dragging on tile. It echoed down one of the side corridors, and Nathan froze mid-sentence. Did you hear that? He asked, lowering the camera. I nodded, but neither of us moved. It came again, louder this time, closer. I whispered that we should go. He nodded slowly, but instead of turning around, he stepped toward the sound. Just 5 more minutes, he said. If there's something down here, we're not the first to hear it. I wanted to scream at him. Instead, I followed, because I was scared to be alone in that place more than I was scared of the sound. That's how this started. Not with a scream or a body or even blood. Just the people chasing a sound they shouldn't have heard in the first place. That's the part no one talks about. The moment before things go wrong. I didn't realize how deep Nathan had gone until after we got back from the first visit. I thought it was over, that we'd taken a few creepy photos, gotten spooked, and moved on like we always did. But that wasn't the end for him. It was just the beginning. Over the next week, he started posting online Reddit threads, deep dive forums, anywhere someone might have heard of Operation Threshold, and people responded, a lot of them. Turns out, there was already a subculture obsessed with this thing. A half dozen other podcasters had tried chasing the same story over the years, but hit walls. Files disappeared. Whistleblowers backed out. Even Exhume pulled the episode 3 days after it aired without explanation. Nathan had saved a copy, of course. He played it for me again in his basement, looping one section over and over, the part where the nurse describes the isolation schedule. That's when I started to worry, because Nathan wasn't just studying it. He was trying to replicate it. According to the podcast, the experiment had 5 phases. Each subject was isolated in a soundproof room, monitored by camera and audio feed. No sleep allowed under any circumstances. If they nodded off, alarms blared. If they closed their eyes too long, cold air was pumped in. The point wasn't just to see what sleep deprivation did, it was to see what the mind let in. When it was forced to stay open, that's how they said it. What the mind lets in. Nathan latched onto that phrase. He printed it, taped it too. The wall above his desk made it the lock screen on his phone, and that's when he started gathering people, not just me, others from the forum. He said he wanted to build a simulation of the experiment using the same conditions. I told him it was insane. He said it was research. We're not hurting anyone. He said, we're just observing. But there were rules, specific ones, and they weren't normal sleep studies. They were ritualistic, even if Nathan didn't want to admit it. Rule 1, no sleep for 72 hours, minimum. Everyone participating had to commit to that baseline. Rule 2, each person had to be monitored by someone else, in rotating shifts, so nobody ever fell asleep unnoticed. Rule 3, no communication with the outside world once the trial began. Phones off. No windows. No clocks. The last rule was the one that made me sick. If anyone started talking to someone else in the room, someone not part of the group, no one was allowed to intervene. Just observe. Nathan said it was part of the control protocol, but I knew. He got that directly from the leaked files mentioned on the podcast. It was the same wording, verbatim. He had printed screenshots of the original documents, redacted names and all, and cross-referenced them with building layouts. He even sketched blueprints on graph paper. I wish I was making this up. I wish. I'd walked away, but I didn't. I was worried about him. I thought if I played along, I could stop it from going too far. I didn't realize we were already there. The location he picked for the simulation wasn't Pine Hills. That place had been sealed again after our visit, and someone, maybe the state, maybe someone else, had put up surveillance signs and added fresh padlocks to the front gates. So Nathan went smaller, local. He rented an old hunting lodge in the Catskills. No neighbors, no cell signal. He even rigged blackout curtains across every window and wrapped tinfoil along the inner frame of the doors. EM interference, he said. Got to keep it clean. By the time we arrived, there were 5 of us: me, Nathan, a grad student named Kinsey, a nurse named Alvaro, and a guy who called himself Sledge, though I'm pretty sure that wasn't his real name. Nathan had been talking to all of them online for months. They all knew the rules. They all believed in the experiment. I was the only one still pretending this was some twisted joke that had gone too far. We started at midnight on a Friday. Nathan even called it 0 hour. He handed out old notebooks to everyone, like journals. Each one had a red circle drawn on the front cover, his version of the experiment's entry mark. He said it was a reference to a symbol found, etched into one of the Pine Hill cell walls. I didn't believe him, but I didn't argue either. Each person had a bunk, a camera mounted above it, and a spotlight on a motion timer that would flash if you stopped moving. For more than 15 minutes, it was all so methodical, calculated, and weirdest of all, everyone went along with it. No hesitation, no mocking. They treated it like gospel. Even Kinsey, who seemed the most skeptical at first, got quiet and focused once the lights went out. I didn't sleep that night. Obviously, none of us did. We sat in a circle, drinking coffee, jotting down observations like we were in a lab, but it didn't feel like science. It felt like a countdown had started, and we were the ones running the clock. The first 12 hours were fine. A little claustrophobic, sure, but nothing unusual. Everyone was tired but alert. By hour 20, things got stranger. Sledge started humming under his breath. Alvaro stared at the wall for almost an hour straight, without blinking. Nathan asked, "You us all to write down what we saw when we closed our eyes. Not dreams, just shapes, colors, patterns." He said those were the early signs of threshold drift, the moment where consciousness stops behaving like it should. Around hour 29, Kinsey reported hearing a sound like a child laughing behind her bunk curtain. There was no one else there, no children for miles, but Nathan smiled when she said it, like that was exactly what he'd been waiting for. And that's when I knew we weren't part of some simulation. We were part of a summoning, even if no one wanted to use that word yet. And whatever it was Nathan was trying to call up, it had already started listening. By our 36, we all looked like ghosts. Our skin was pale, our eyes ringed with bruised color, and no one was speaking above a whisper anymore. It was like the silence of the place had started to infect. Every surface in the lodge felt muffled, as if we'd sunk underwater. The coffee pot ran dry sometime around dawn, and no one had the energy to make more. Nathan was the only one still writing with any discipline. He filled page after page in his notebook, always hunched over the same spot at the dining room table, lips moving silently as he scribbled. I looked over his shoulder once. and saw nothing but strings of numbers, just lines and lines of them dates, timestamps, coordinates. None of it made sense. When I asked what he was tracking, he looked at me like I was the crazy one. Sleep has a frequency, he said, and something's tuning in. That's when I started sleeping with the flashlight on, not because I thought it would protect me, but because I didn't trust the dark anymore. Not in that place. Each of us responded differently to the lack of sleep. Alvaro got quiet, robotic. He stopped blinking. I caught him once in the bathroom, mirror just staring at himself, not moving for over 10 minutes. Kenzie started pacing, counting each step, whispering to herself. She was the first to suggest something was wrong with the lights. She said the hallway bulbs didn't flicker, they breathed, like they were pulsing in time with something else, something watching us. I wanted to laugh it off, but I'd noticed it too. The way the shadows crept just a little too far into the center of the room. The way your own reflection would sometimes lag a second along behind your movements. By our 40, no one trusted the mirrors anymore. Nathan had us cover them with trash bags and duct tape. Too much visual noise, he said. But I think the real reason was simpler. We were starting to see things we weren't sure belonged to us anymore. We reviewed footage each day, part of Nathan's so-called data collection. Most of it was boring, people nodding, twitching, rambling in circles. But some clips were different. In one, Kenzie was sleeping just for a moment, but her camera didn't trigger the alarm. That wasn't supposed to happen. We watched it. Again, and there, just past the edge of the bed, was a shape, thin, tall, blurry, like static frozen in the shape of a person. Nathan paused the video and stared at it for a long time. Confirmation, he said softly, but no one responded. We just stared. I kept thinking about that final rule: do not interrupt communication with anyone who is not part of the control group. Were we being conditioned, prepared to ignore the signs, or were we already too far gone to tell the difference between protocol and possession? At that point, I couldn't be sure. Sledge was the first to crack, our 48. He locked himself in the pantry and wouldn't come out. Said the walls were buzzing and that something was whispering his name through the floorboards. When we finally coaxed him out, he looked like a feral animalized bloodshot, nails bitten down to raw edges. He sat in the corner and refused to sleep, refused to speak, refused to eat. Nathan wouldn't stop filming. He said it was important. Document the threshold. He kept repeating. They said it starts with isolation. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to. No, that night, I saw Sledge walk into the hallway alone. I heard him talking to someone. But when I checked the footage the next morning, his camera feed went black for 15 minutes, just gone. The file existed. The audio track existed. But there was no image, just static and the sound of breathing. That's when I started to wonder if Nathan was right about something. Maybe sleep wasn't the point. Maybe it was the thing that filled the gap where sleep was supposed to be. By our 60, we weren't a group anymore. We were 5 separate islands drifting in the same haunted sea. The lodge felt different. Bigger in some places, smaller in others. The doors didn't line up the way they used to. I'd walk into a room and the window would be gone, or the curtains would be drawn when I knew I hadn't touched them. One morning, I found my notebook open to a page I hadn't written. It said door behind the door. Don't forget. I showed it to Kenzie. She didn't say anything, just stared at me for a long time and said, I've seen it too. But when I asked her what it meant, she wouldn't answer. Later that night, I tried to leave. I told Nathan we needed to stop, that we pushed too far. He just shook his head and pointed at the clock he'd drawn on the wall. It was a red circle with a single hand moving counterclockwise. Almost time. He whispered, we're almost ready. That was the last full sentence he ever said to me. I think it began with the hallway. That's when things truly started to break. There was always a hallway leading from the living area to the bunk rooms. It had a dead end and a closet at the end of it. Just an old linen closet that we'd opened on the first day and left empty. But somewhere around the third night, the hallway seemed longer. I don't mean in the sense of optical illusion, I mean physically, measurably longer. I paced it 3 times and counted 15 steps. I know it had only taken 10 before. I know that because I'd measured it for fun on the first night, pacing it to keep myself alert. When I told Nathan, he didn't look surprised. He actually seemed excited. It's folding, he said under his breath. Finally, I asked what that meant. He just smiled and wrote it down like a scientist observing an animal about to mutate. Kenzie was the one who found the new door. It was on the left side of the hallway, where there had only been a blank wall before, a small iron door with no handle, just a recessed circle in the center, like the kind you might find on a submarine hatch. It had no hinges, no frame. The wall itself seemed to warp around it, the paint bubble, the lines of the wallpaper stretching in slow waves toward the metal. She called the rest of us over in a whisper, like she was afraid to raise her voice near it. I don't know why, but we all felt it. That same heaviness, that same pressure behind the eyes. Alvaro reached out to touch it and hissed as his fingers grazed the surface. Cold, he said. Too cold. Nathan dropped to one knee and started tracing the edges with a Sharpie. I told him we needed to leave. Right then. He didn't even look at me. It's not new, he said. It was always here. We just couldn't see it before. That's when I felt the first real wave of nausea. Something inside me recoiled from that door, like it wasn't meant for us to see it. Or maybe it wasn't meant to see us yet. That night, the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. The generator still worked. The heat was still on. But the air turned wet, almost gelatinous, like it was pressing against our skin. Breathing became effort. Every exhale felt stolen. Kenzie started bleeding from the nose. Alvaro didn't blink once for nearly 4 hours, just sat in the corner, mouthing prayers in Spanish. Sledge had disappeared by then. He was just gone. No one saw him leave. His camera feed had gone black around 4 a.m., and the door sensor hadn't triggered. When I brought this up to Nathan, he said, there was never a Sledge. I thought he was joking, so I checked the footage from the first night. There were only 4 of us, for notebooks, for bunks, but I remembered Sledge. I remembered his voice, his heavy boots, the panic in his eyes when the lights flickered. Either I was losing my mind or this place was editing us in real time, like some old VHS tape being taped over and spliced again. By now, the door was warm to the touch. The metal vibrated faintly, like something was running behind it. Nathan began recording audio near it, placing the digital recorder on the floor and whispering questions. It was a ritual by then. Every hour, on the hour, he'd sit cross-legged and murmur to the door, "Who are you? What do you want? Are you inside the room or am I?" That last one stuck with me, because I didn't understand it until I did. Until I walked into the bathroom and saw myself standing there, brushing my teeth. Only it wasn't me. Not quite. The hair was parted the wrong way. The shirt was one I hadn't worn in years, and the reflection wasn't matching my movements. It turned its head a few seconds too late, then it smiled. I backed out of the room. Without blinking, I didn't go near that mirror again. The next day, Nathan covered all reflective surfaces in black cloth. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. We all understood by then. We weren't looking at our reflections. We were being watched through them by our 72. The rules were collapsing. No one was documenting anything. The notebook sat untouched, pages curled from damp air. No one checked the timers or reviewed the footage. We just listened. The lodge had become quiet. The silence was total, pressing. No birds outside, no wind, just the door, always humming, always pulling our focus. Alvaro started speaking in voices that weren't his, whispering in a cadence that matched the static recordings. Kenzie stopped responding to her name entirely. She began writing, words in a language we didn't recognize, over and over, in thick black Sharpie on the walls and on her skin. When I tried to get her to stop, she bit me, hard, drew blood. That night, I heard the door open, not creak, not groan, open, just a faint metallic thunk like a latch being undone, and a rush of air that wasn't cold or warm, just hungry. I didn't go look. I just lay there, eyes wide, pretending I was still asleep, even though I knew. Sleep was the one thing none of us were getting ever again. I thought Nathan had finally gone silent by our 84, but the truth was worse. He was speaking constantly, just not in any language I recognized. He sat cross-legged in front of the door for hours at a time, whispering strings of sounds that looped like broken audio. Some of the syllables had hard, clicking edges like broken teeth scraping metal. Others hissed with a low, watery rattle that made the back of my head throb when I got too close. The only time he stopped was to write, page after page, in his notebook. But he wasn't writing words anymore. They were symbol circles wrapped in jagged runes, columns of triangles inside squares. I flipped one page by accident and saw my name, dozens of times, written between the marks, boxed in like a pattern. When I looked up at him, his eyes were wide and empty, as if he'd been staring at the dark for so long. He'd mistaken it for light. That's when I realized this wasn't Nathan anymore. Not really. Whatever part of him had organized this experiment had been replaced. He hadn't found something in the dark. He let it in. Kenzie was next. She spoke to me briefly on our 8 to 7, when the lights finally cut out completely. We were huddled in what used to be the storage room, the last place in the lodge that didn't reek of damp metal and decay. Her voice was so small I had to lean in. She said, "It's not about sleep. It was never about sleep. That was just the door frame." When I asked her what the door led to, she shook her head so hard her teeth chattered. "It leads to us. That's why it works. That's why it opens." And then she said something that still wakes me up at night. "It doesn't come from the room. It was already here. It just needed us to remember it." That broke me. I'd been so focused on the space, the strange architecture, the warped dimensions, the recordings, that I hadn't thought about the possibility that we were the mechanism. Our presence, our minds, our attention. That's what the whole thing fed on. Not the experiment, not the rules, just the act of believing there was something to find. The next morning, if you could even call it that, Alvaro walked straight through the metal door. I didn't even see it open. One moment it was shut tight, and the next it was ajar just enough for him to squeeze through. He didn't hesitate. He didn't speak. He just walked in like he was following a song only he could hear. Nathan stood beside the door, nodding, his hands raised like he was conducting some private ceremony. Then the door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the walls, and when I ran to it, there was no handle anymore. No seams, just cold steel and silence. I turned on Nathan, shoved him hard against the wall, screamed at him to open it. He just smiled, and for a split second, I swear I saw something shift under his skin. A ripple, like something was wearing his body and trying to remember how it moved. He said, "You've already been inside. You just don't remember how you got out." That stopped me cold, because something in me did remember. Something distant, something buried. Like a dream you forget until you walk back into the place it happened. There were no more hours after that. Time stopped existing. The clocks Nathan had drawn on the walls disappeared. My watch turned to static. Kenzie was the only one who didn't completely lose herself. She stayed close, clutched her notebook to her chest like a shield, and kept whispering numbers in reverse. I asked her what she was doing. She said, "Keeping track of the wrongs." When I pressed her, she broke down crying and said, "We were never supposed to be here. This place was buried for a reason." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to, because every creak of the wood, every shift in the walls, every flicker of light felt like something ancient pushing its way into the now. Not a ghost, not a demon, a memory that didn't belong to us. And the more we acknowledged it, the more solid it became. Like belief was the final piece of the ritual. The belief that something shouldn't be here, and the mistake of trying to name it anyway. I don't know what the original experiment was supposed to uncover. Maybe it really was just about sleep deprivation. Maybe it started as science. But someone along the way back in 1984, or long before, must have realized that when you take people far enough past sleep, far enough past sanity, they don't just see things. They open things. The doors aren't in the walls. They're in us. And once they open, you can't shut them again. You can run. You can scream. You can cover every mirror and tape over every shadow. But if it got a good enough look at you, if it remembers you, then the door follows. It waits. And when the light flickers or the silence stretches too long, it knocks. Not to be let in, but to remind you it still knows your name. It happened all at once. No build-up. No signal. One moment we were sitting in silence, and the next, the entire lodge groaned like it was alive. The walls pulsed inward with a low, shuddering creak, like something massive had leaned against them from outside or worse, from within. Kenzie screamed. Not a startled yell, but the kind of scream that strips your throat raw. I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the front door, only to realize it was gone. Not blocked, not locked, gone. The hallway was now just more hallway, looping around into itself, stretching longer with every step we took. It was like the building had unzipped itself and was now folding in on dimensions we weren't meant to understand. Nathan didn't follow us. He stood frozen in the corner, head tilted at an angle that made my stomach lurch. His eyes were rolled back, his mouth hanging open. He wasn't breathing. Not really, but his chest moved in slow, shallow jerks, like someone was practicing how to be him and hadn't quite figured it out yet. Kenzie and I didn't stop. We ran through room after room, but nothing stayed where it should have. The kitchen led into a bedroom. The bedroom led into the closet. The closet opened back into the hall, where the iron door now stood wide open, and behind it nothing, just blackness, not shadow, not darkness, nothing. I stared along. I don't know how long. It felt like something on the other side noticed me looking and decided to look back. My nose started to bleed. I turned away, dragging Kinsey with me, but she was slowing down. She kept looking over her shoulder, muttering that someone was walking behind us, breathing down her neck. I didn't hear anything, but I believed her. I could not believe her. Not after everything we'd seen. We tore down the service hallway and found the basement stairs. I didn't remember a basement. I'm still not sure it existed before that moment, but the door was open, and it was our only option. So we went down, and the air got colder with each step. The cold do be natural, cold like the absence of heat, cold like a freezer meant for things that weren't supposed to come back. We reached the bottom and found rows of lockers along the walls, like an old staff break room. Most were rusted shut, but one was slightly open. Inside was a tangle of wires, an old recording reel, and a stack of manila folders that were soaked in molding. I grabbed them anyway. Something told me they mattered. The second I did, a loud bang echoed from above. Then another. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Running. Not like a person. No rhythm. Just weight. Shifting. Erratic weight. Like something that didn't care about gravity or angles or bone structure was moving through the building now. I killed the flashlight. We crouched behind a boiler unit, breathing through our teeth, trying not to make a sound. Whatever it was came to the top of the stairs and paused. I could feel it listening, like pressure behind my eyes. It didn't move for a full minute. Then it made a sound I will never forget. Not a growl, not a voice, a question, a laugh. Too low to be human, too amused to be anything else. It said, "Still awake," and then walked away like it had all the time in the world. When the silence returned, we didn't waste it. We found an old maintenance hatch in the boiler room that led to a crawl space filled with pipes and dust. The walls were marked with black handprints, dozens of them. Too small to be adult, too long to be child. We moved fast, crawling until our knees were raw and our arms ached. Finally, we saw daylight through a grate above us, a rusted panel that must have led to the outside. I climbed first, kicking it loose and pulling myself into the open air. When I turned back to help Kinsey, she was frozen halfway through the hatch. Her eyes were wide and locked on something behind me. I turned just in time to see Nathan standing at the edge of the woods, head tilted, smiling like a broken doll. But his face, something was off, like it was melting into someone else, shifting slowly from person to person. I grabbed Kinsey and hauled her up as the trees behind him began to ripple. Like the forest wasn't just trees anymore. It was watching. It was waking up. We ran. No direction. No plan. Just instinct. Hours passed. Maybe more. We finally found the road by sheer luck, flagged down a car that almost didn't stop, and were driven in silence to the next town over. Kinsey didn't speak the entire ride. Her hands shook the whole time. When we got to the sheriff's station, I tried explaining. I told them about Pine Hills, the lodge, the footage, but the folders I'd taken, gone, not lost, missing, like they'd never existed. No one could verify a rental agreement on the lodge. The road itself was now listed as closed access due to landslide damage, every lead erased. They called it a shared delusion, mass hysteria brought on by stress and lack of sleep. I was too tired to argue, too afraid to explain what I'd heard that night beneath the floor. That thing asking if I was still awake, because if I acknowledged it again, even to myself, I was scared it would come back, and this time, it wouldn't ask permission. It's been for years since the night we ran from that lodge. Kinsey moved out west and changed her name. I don't blame her. I've only heard from her twice, both times in the mails sent from burner addresses, unsigned. The first just said, "Are you still awake?" The second had no message, just a photo attachment of a notebook page. It had my name written over and over in tiny, perfect handwriting, spiraling inward like a whirlpool. No return address, no follow-up. I still don't know if she wrote it or if she was trying to warn me. I haven't answered either message. I've deleted them both more than once, only to find them back in my inbox the next day. Different timestamps, different subject lines, but the same file, the same spiral. It's like that page wants me to open it again, to stare along, to remember what I saw. I won't. I won't look again. I can't afford to. I tried to forget. I really did. I took a job in a different city. I threw away my journals, scrubbed my hard drives, changed every password, and burned the old tapes. But there are still nights quiet, windless nights when I wake up at exactly 3:33 a.m., heart pounding, mouth dry. I swear I hear someone breathing in the hallway outside my apartment door. Not walking, not talking, just breathing. Shallow, rhythmic, like someone trying not to be heard. I've checked a dozen times. There's never anyone there, but the hallway always smells like static. That dry, dusty electric smell you only notice when something's about to short out, or when something old is waking up again. I bought blackout curtains, sleep with white noise, even started using melatonin just to force some kind of rest. But the dreams don't care. They come anyway. They're not even dreams, really. Just memories I didn't know I had, flickering like old film reels, hallways that don't end, doors that open into themselves, voices that sound like mine, but say things I don't remember saying. I've done the research, the responsible thing. I looked into Pine Hills, tried to find legal records, building plans, anything that could prove what happened to us. But the facility doesn't exist anymore, not officially. The land is now listed as state forest. No structures, no roads, and when I reached out to the production company that made Exhume, they claimed no knowledge of any episode titled The Wakefulness Files or Operation Threshold. The host, Maureen Cross, disappeared 6 months after our incident. Website gone. All her accounts wiped clean, like she was part of it, or like she got too close. The Reddit threads Nathan used to post in, deleted. The usernames banned. I checked again last week out of morbid curiosity, and the subreddit itself now leads to a blank page, with a single pinned comment. No upvotes, no replies, just still awake. I closed the tab immediately and shut off my computer. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't try to. But I think the worst part is what showed up last month. I came home from work and found a package on my kitchen table. No sign of forced entry, no note, just a flat manila envelope, sealed with red wax. I opened it with shaking hands and pulled out a single Polaroid. It was taken in a hallway. Not mine, not Kenzie's, but familiar. The kind with concrete walls and hospital tiles, stained and uneven. In the center of the frame was a door, metal, round latch, no handle, just like before. And below it, written in thick red Sharpie, were 2 words, "Welcome back." I dropped the photo, but when I picked it up again, the writing was gone. The door looked closed, normal, but now, every time I look at the picture, I swear the hallway seems a little longer, a little darker, like it's growing. So yeah, I know how ridiculous this sounds. I know how it reads like internet creepypasta, or a trauma dream someone posted for attention. But I'm not telling this to scare you. I'm telling it because someone has to remember, because that's how it starts, with one person not sleeping, with one question left unanswered. That's all it takes. One open door, one pair of eyes that refuses to shut. The sleep experiment didn't end. It never ended. It just needed new volunteers. And if you're reading this, if you're listening, if you felt that same pull to keep the lights on just a little longer, you're already part of it. So ask yourself one thing, and ask carefully, not out loud, just quietly in your own mind. Right now, are you still awake? Because if you are, it already knows. I was broke, not like skipping dash lunch dash to dash save money, broke flat, empty bank account, missed rent, riding on the last fumes of my student loan extensions, kind of broke. I had just turned 26, fresh off quitting my 3rd job in a year, still clinging to the hope that my freelance photography work would pan out. It wasn't. My parents had long since given up bailing me out, and my roommate had moved back in with his girlfriend, leaving me to cover the lease on our half-rotted place in Schenectady alone. I needed a break, any break. I told myself I just needed one good project, one decent portfolio piece, one freelance gig with a big enough check to make it to January. So when I got in a mail from an old college friend named Rowan about a harvest festival in upstate New York that needed documentary coverage, I didn't think twice. No rate was discussed. No details. Just a vague promise. Come up to Merrow Creek. They'll feed you, house you, and you'll get full creative control. They need someone to tell their story. Looking back though, I should have asked, why they were in such a rush to find someone last minute. Rowan had always been a little strange. In college, he'd been the quiet guy in the back of the editing lab, the one who always chose folk horror for his genre assignments and wore gloves even in spring. He vanished after junior year, just dropped out. No one really kept in touch, myself included, but when his name popped up in my inbox, it felt like fate, or maybe desperation. Either way, I answered. We spoke once on the phone. He sounded distant, static on the line, like he was already somewhere remote. It's a tradition, he told me, a real one. You won't find anything like it online. It's all word of mouth, deep roots. It'll look amazing in your portfolio. He said the festival only happened once a year, during the harvest moon, that the town was mostly self-contained, no hotels, no tourist traps, no outside press. They don't usually allow cameras, he added, but they're making an exception. This year, we've got an opportunity to show what this place really is. I told myself that kind of access was rare, valuable, authentic. Now I think it was just bait. The drive up was long and lonely. 5 hours through winding mountain roads, patches of farmland, and long stretches of pine where the radio gave. Out in my GPS lagged by a full minute. Merrill Creek didn't even show up on my map app until I was less than 10 miles away. Just a cluster of side roads branching from an unnamed route. As I pulled into the town limits, the welcome sign came. Interview white wood, hand-painted, old and weather-warped. It read, Merrill Creek, homegrown since 1879. We sow what we keep. I remember thinking that was weird phrasing, like a mistranslation of a motto that made sense once, but no longer did. The town itself was beautiful in a brittle, fall, postcard kind of way to rows of colonial homes, a small general store, a church with a half-burned steeple, and cornfields as far as the eye could see. You couldn't take a photo without catching some shade of amber or rust. It felt staged, in a way, like a film set preserved just for 1 week a year. Rowan met me at the old boarding house where I'd be staying. He looked older, thinner, paler, but his eyes were bright and fevered. He greeted me like we'd just finished a dorm room editing session, totally ignoring the gap in years. You made it, he said. Good. You'll want to start capturing B-roll tonight. Sunset's the best light out here. The boarding house was creaky and smelled like apple cider and mildew, but it had a bed, hot water, and working outlets. That was enough. My room overlooked the main square where the festival would begin. Strings of hand-woven corn husk lanterns had already been hung across the street. Children in handmade overalls chased each other between bales of hay while older. Folks stood at corners, quietly watching me unload my bags. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. Just watched. Not with malice. Not exactly. More like curiosity. Or expectation. Rowan handed me a festival pamphlet. One of the old folded paper kinds, with block-printed illustrations and a wax-sealed stamp across the front. Keep this on you, he said. There's a schedule, a map, some rules. Most of it's ceremonial, but they take it seriously. The booklet listed events like the Lantern Blessing, the Naming Bowl, and something called the Night Toll, scheduled precisely for moonrise on the last day. What's that one? I asked, pointing to the name. Rowan just shook his head. That's not for outsiders. Just film the morning stuff. Stay out of the fields after dark. Trust me. I laughed, thinking it was part of the town's mystique. Some kind of rural cosplay. I even scribbled a note in my pocket journal. Local lore equals deeper dock angle. But that was before the first interview. Before the little girl told me about the scarecrow that watches the moon. Before I learned what the cornfield really hides during the harvest moon. And long before I realized the last person to film Merrill Creek disappeared exactly 10 years ago. Camera and all, the documentary team was small, just me and a couple of kids Rowan had recruited from nearby counties. There was Mila, a soft-spoken film student from Binghamton who handled audio and setup, and Jonah, a self-taught drone operator who was more interested in getting aerial shots of the cornfields than talking to anyone. Rowan called us the archive team, like we were there for something more official than a low-budget local festival. He made it sound like we were part of a historical effort, not just capturing footage, but preserving something old. This place only lets itself be seen once a year, he said, while pinning the shot list to the wall of the boarding house. Don't miss anything. If you see something weird, film it. Don't ask. Just get it on tape. That last part stuck with me. I've worked with all kinds of creative directors before, but none of them ever said, if you see something weird. It's always when, but Rowan made it sound like oddness was a given, like something about this place was meant to shift in front of the lens. We spent the first full day scouting locations. The town council had given us access to most of the public areas. The town square, the chapel basement, the seed barn, and a strange, dome-shaped structure in the middle of the cornfields that Rowan called the circle. It wasn't marked on any of the printed maps. From above, it looked like someone had shaved a perfect ring out of the crops and filled it with small wooden figures, rough-hewn dolls strung up like marionettes. I asked Rowan if it was some kind of art installation. He shook his head and muttered, "They say the Reaper sleeps there." I laughed, thought he was being theatrical. He didn't. Just get a wide shot before dusk. We'll never see it the same way twice. I remember writing that in my journal too, as a quote, but later, when I flipped back through my notes, that page was gone. Clean tear, right at the spine. I thought maybe the wind caught it when we were in the fields, but I still remember writing those words. I remember the exacting stroke. It was real, or it had been. As we worked, I started noticing little things that didn't add up. The townspeople were polite, but always kept their distance. If I asked a direct question, especially anything about history or folklore, they'd redirect me with practiced cheer. "That's just old stories," or "We don't dwell on that," or "That's not for harvest time." When I asked an elderly man on the porch about the ninth toll, he smiled without teeth and said, "That's between us and the field, son. Best you rest during that one." They weren't hostile, not exactly, but the air around the topic closed up tight. Whenever we got too close, Mila called it crop silence. That weird, airy hush that hangs over cornfields when there's no wind and everything feels like it's holding its breath. I knew the vibe she meant. I'd felt it myself the first time we passed the circle, like the whole town was waiting for something to arrive, and we weren't supposed to notice how long it had already been here. We planned to cover each day of the festival in fold-on blessings, grain grinding competitions, seed swap rituals, and nightly feasts hosted in a communal barn lit only by lanterns. Everything was carefully timed, obsessively so. Rowan posted the daily schedule on the fridge and insisted we check in before each shoot. Nothing starts late. Nothing ends early. You have to be where they expect you. He didn't say what would happen if we weren't, and I didn't ask. I figured it was just his way of keeping us on track, especially since he knew the town better than we did. But the way he said it's so precise, so final, made me uneasy, like we were part of something that didn't forgive lateness, like being out of step was more dangerous than being rude. The more time I spent here, the more I realized how tightly controlled the festival actually was. This wasn't some cheerful celebration. It was a system, one designed to function whether we understood it or not. That night, after we wrapped our shoot of the seed sorting ceremony, Jonah showed me something strange on his drone footage. A frame just one captured from about 100 feet above the circle. In it, you could see the wooden dolls clearly, but one of them wasn't wood. It was a girl, a child, maybe 7 or 8, standing perfectly still among the figures, arms outstretched, face blank, not blinking, not moving. In the next frame, she was gone. I asked him if he edited it in some glitch overlay or post trick. He swore. He didn't. I checked the raw data myself. It was clean, real. She had been there, just for that 1 second. Could have been a prank, he said, trying to brush it off. Maybe a kid ran out there to freak us out, but there were no footprints in the ring, no signs anyone had disturbed the soil, just that flash of a pale, unmoving face looking straight up at the drone lens. I told Rowan about it the next morning. He didn't react. He just said, "It's starting," and walked away. The first day of the festival felt like stepping into a memory that wasn't mine. Everything was handmade, deliberate, steeped in a kind of ceremonial repetition that didn't allow for improvisation. Children wore burlap vests embroidered with faded wheat symbols, their arms stained with red dye from the apple mash barrels. Elders walked in pairs, tapping carved wooden canes in sync as they passed, each thump punctuated by a whispered blessing I couldn't catch. The whole town moved with purpose. Everyone had a role. Everyone knew their timing. We were the only ones who didn't. As soon as I started filming, I felt like I was recording something that wasn't meant to be watched, like an echo of an older world that barely tolerated being seen by strangers. There was no music, no laughter, just the steady rhythm of work and ritual, broken only by the town crier announcing the time. 5 days to the moon, 5 days to the toll. The way he said it didn't feel festive. It felt final. We shot the opening ceremony just after sunrise. A procession of townsfolk in gray robes walked from the chapel to the cornfields, each carrying a bundle of dried stalks. They placed them in a pile near the circle, lit them on fire, and stood silently as the smoke curled upward into the sky. Rowan didn't speak the entire time. He filmed on his own camera, occasionally adjusting our angles, always making sure we stayed a few steps behind the procession. When I asked him later what the fire symbolized, he only said, "It's not for us. Just record it. They won't stop doing it just because we're here." Mila caught audio of the burning stock slow pops and hisses, but under the crackle, there was something else, a layered hum, like dozens of voices murmuring at once. I isolated the file later that night in Audacity, thinking it was a compression glitch, but the waveform looked like it was breathing, pulsing in time, like the recording itself had a heartbeat. Mila refused to listen to it a second time, said it made her chest feel tight, like something was pressing her down from inside. By noon, we were following the second event, the naming bowl. It took place in the town square, where a large, hand-carved basin filled with water and floating stock sat on a pedestal. One by one, children under 12 were brought forward and handed a corn husk doll. They whispered a name into its ear, dropped it into the bowl, and stepped back. Then a woman with pale eyes and ash-colored braids would reach in and pull one. At random, she'd read the whispered name aloud: Ellis, June, Nathaniel, Ellis again. The crowd nodded after each name, then turned as one toward the fields and stood in silence for 10 full seconds. No clapping, no explanation, just silence. I couldn't tell if the names meant anything, or if they were offerings, memories, or warnings. I noticed some children looked nervous to participate. A few even cried when they handed off their dolls, but none refused. No one ever refused. When I asked Rowan if the names were recorded anywhere, he said, "They're remembered. That's enough." That was the first time I realized this wasn't just tradition. It was memory given ritual form, and we were documenting something sacred to them, whether they'd said it aloud or not. That night, the harvest feast was held in the barn behind the boarding house. Long wooden tables were stacked with roasted squash, apple cider, cornbread, dried venison, and bowls of a thick, reddish stew that no one named. Every guest brought something in a covered dish. Every single person in the town was present. No one left early. No one arrived late. The seats had names burned into them, and every one of us outsiders was seated on a stool with no marking. Jonah made a joke about being the kids' table for the uninitiated, but nobody laughed. At one point, the room went silent, and I saw an older man at the far end rise to give a toast, but no words came. He just raised his cup, stared toward the open barn doors, and everyone followed his gaze. Outside, the moon was low but already burning bright, hanging just above the cornfield like a lantern suspended by something invisible. I caught it on film, without thinking. When I reviewed the footage later, the moon looked wrong. Not distorted, just wrong. Off-center. Like it was watching us back through the lens. I couldn't sleep that night. The boarding house walls were thin, and I kept hearing soft tapping from the hallway. Not footsteps, just a tap every 15 seconds, like someone pressing a single knuckle against the floorboard rhythmically. I opened my door once and saw nothing but the dark. The hallway light long since burned out. The tapping stopped the second I stepped into the hall. When I returned to bed, I found the pamphlet Rowan gave me on my pillow. I hadn't left it there, and someone had circled an event I hadn't seen before. Night 4. The offering walk. There was no time or location listed, just a single note scrawled beneath the circle in thin red ink. Some must be seen, others must be taken. I went to Rowan's room to ask him what it meant. His door was closed, locked. I knocked. No answer. But from inside, I swear I heard whispering his voice, and something else, something lower, speaking just out of sync. I went back to bed. I didn't knock again. That was the first night I dreamed of the cornfields, and of the reaper in the rows, his face stitched shut and his arms made of straw, watching me sleep from behind the glass. The next few days blurred together into something stiff and hushed, like old film, with sound stripped away. The town kept moving in its eerie rhythm ceremonies each morning, silent meals each night, but something had shifted. The smiles were tighter. The gazes lingered longer. More and more townsfolk were matching pins on their collars, tiny bundles of red thread twisted into the shape of a crescent moon. Mila pointed it out during the grain exchange ceremony and said they reminded her of morning bands. When I asked Rowan about it, he looked annoyed, like I'd broken some unspoken rule. "You weren't supposed to see those," he said. "Not, they shouldn't be wearing them. Not, it's nothing to worry about. Just you weren't supposed to." See, that was when I realized the truth. The festival wasn't just about the harvest. It was about obscuring, about letting outsiders see only what the town allowed. And the deeper we dug, the more they turned their backs to us. They stopped answering questions. They started closing doors. They began to look past us instead of at us. Jonah started spending more time with the drone, pulling farther and farther away from the group. He said the air felt better in the fields, cleaner. Said it helped clear the static headaches he'd been getting. Mila and I stuck closer together, especially at night. She admitted she hadn't slept through a full night since the second day. She kept hearing whispering under her bed, barely audible, like a voice breathing through burlap. We both thought it might be old pipes at first, but one night, we recorded it, played it back. What we heard wasn't plumbing, it was a voice, repeating her name over and over, slow and cracked like someone speaking through dry leaves. "Mila, Mila, Mila." And then, just before the tape cut out, it added something new. "We choose in pairs." She deleted the file before I could stop her. I asked Rowan if there were twin-themed rituals or dances, anything that required pairs. He didn't answer. He just turned away and mumbled, "You weren't on the list." That phrase stuck with me like a shard of glass in my throat. I didn't know there was a list. During the third dusk, we tried filming the circle again, this time at Golden Hour. The dolls were still there, weather-worn now, like they'd aged decades in just a few days. One had been replaced entirely, a new one, dressed in red plaid with buttons for eyes and real hair stitched to its head. I recognized the shirt immediately. It was Jonah's. When we turned to look for him, he was gone. Not stepped away to peek on, vanished. His gear was still where he'd left it, drone case open, flight app running on the phone screen, but there was no sign of him. We called his name. We checked the fields. Nothing. Rowan didn't. Seemed surprised. Just said. He got too close. Mila lost it. Screamed at him. Demanded we call the sheriff. Rowan told her there was no sheriff, just a town council, and they'd already acknowledged the shift. I didn't understand what that meant until we returned to the boarding house that night and found Jonah's name burned off his stool at the dining table. Just a smooth black mark where his name had been. No one else mentioned him again, as if he'd never arrived, as if his seat had always been empty. The next day, Mila refused to leave the house. She sat on her bed, whispering into a recorder, repeating a mantra she wouldn't let me hear. I begged her to leave with me, to pack our gear and get out before the final toll. "They can't make us stay," I said, but she looked at me with hollow eyes and whispered, "They don't have to. We already did." That night, I woke to find the front door open. No wind, no footsteps, just open. I closed it and bolted it shut. When I turned around, I saw a scarecrow standing in the hallway. Just for a second, looming, hunched, head tilted. I blinked and it was gone, but a trail of dirt and dry husks led all the way to the door of Mila's room. I found her in bed, cold to the touch, eyes open but unblinking. She was breathing barely, but something was wrong. She didn't speak, didn't respond, just lay there, lips parted, as if trying to say something through invisible thread. I shook her, called her name. Nothing. That's when I realized what the voice meant. We choose in pairs. Jonah was gone. Mila was next, and if I didn't leave soon, I'd be the third. I tried to run the next morning. I packed what little I could: camera, external hard drives, a duffel bag, and left before sunrise. But every road I took circled back into the town. GPS glitched. The welcome sign showed up 3 different times, always facing the same direction. I started driving in loops, faster, until I passed the same house with the same girl on the porch, staring at me with corn husk in her hands, unmoving. I stopped the car, got out, screamed for help. She didn't blink, just raised the husk to her mouth and whispered a name I couldn't hear. That's when I heard the bell, the 9th toll. One long, low ring that shook the ground and made the sky dim like a dying bulb. I looked toward the field and saw every scarecrow in the circle standing upright, arms raised. Faces turned toward town, and in the center, one figure not made of straw, one figure that moved. That night, I locked myself in my room at the boarding house, wedging a chair under the doorknob and taping the window shut with packing tape from my gear bag. I pushed my dresser against the door and kept a kitchen knife under the pillow, not because I thought it would help, but because I needed anything to make me feel less helpless outside. I could hear them walking, not the townspeople, no. These footsteps were too soft, too slow, dragging, in the dirt like someone pulling a sack of grain. They circled the house, then stopped right outside my window. I didn't dare look. I just sat there, holding my breath. At some point around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. One message, no sender, just 3 words. You were seen. I shut the screen off immediately and buried the phone under my blanket. When I checked it again in the morning, the message was gone. No record of it. But I know I didn't imagine it. I felt it, like heat off a stove, like being watched from inside my own lungs. When the sun rose, I went to check on Mila again. Her door was ajar, and the room inside was empty. Her things were still there, her shoes, her backpack, her audio gear, but the bed was made perfectly, tucked corners, pillow-centered. On top of the blanket sat a single corn husk doll wearing a string of blue thread Miller's bracelet. I knew then that I was the only one left. Rowan was gone, too. His room had been cleaned out entirely, not a scrap left behind. The only trace he'd ever been there was a single sheet of paper stuck to the fridge with a rusty nail. On it, handwritten in shaky script, was a single line. One must remember. One must carry. I didn't know what that meant, but I took the paper anyway and stuffed it into my bag. It felt like something I wasn't supposed to leave behind, like it had weight even though it was just ink on paper, and beneath it, taped to the fridge, was a new map of the town hand-drawn, with a red line leading from the circle to something marked only as the hollow. The ink was still damp. I followed it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it was a way out. Maybe I thought if I found the hollow, I'd find Mila or proof she was still real. The trail led me deep into the cornfields, past the circle, past the rows of empty chairs they'd used during the naming. I walked until the air felt thick and wrong, until the silence started pressing against my chest like water, until I could feel the field breathing around me. The path opened into a circular clearing, trees dead and rotted, earth cracked and blackened. In the center stood a wooden door, just a door frame, really. No walls, no hinges, just an upright frame standing on its own, covered in red thread. Hanging from the top beam were dolls, 7 of them, and one was me, down to the shirt I wore that day. My exact look, my exact patch on the backpack. I dropped to my knees, trying to tear it down, but the thread wouldn't cut. It burned. Literal heat ran through it like wire, and my fingers blistered just trying to pull it free. As I stumbled back, I heard the sound like wind, but sharper, dragging through the stalks like something with long arms brushing past the leaves. The scarecrows from the circle were here now, scattered at the edge of the clearing, closer than they'd ever been. I hadn't seen them move, hadn't heard footsteps, but they were closer, watching, all of them facing the door. One took a step forward, just one. I ran. I didn't think. I dropped my gear bag in the dirt and ran until I tripped on a root and split my knee open. I didn't stop. I didn't care. I ran all the way back to the edge of town, where the main road should have been, but it wasn't. The pavement had ended in a wall of corn, seamless and tall, like it had grown over the road in minutes. There were no tire tracks, no break in the stalks, just more corn, endless, unforgiving. That's when I realized I wasn't outside the ritual. I was inside it, and it wasn't over. I stumbled into the general store, the only place still open, and begged the old woman behind the counter for help. She didn't even look up, just kept peeling an apple with a knife so sharp it didn't make a sound. You should rest, she said, quietly. It's almost time. I asked her for a phone. She handed me a wooden box with a rotary dial that wasn't plugged into anything. I screamed at her, but she didn't flinch, just kept peeling. The shavings fell into a bowl that was already full, like she'd been doing this all morning. On my way out, I passed a wall covered in faded photos, festival snapshots, group portraits, smiling faces, but one of them caught my eye, a black and white photo, older than the rest. It was a group of festival organizers from 1983. Therein, the back row, unmistakable even in monochrome, was Rowan. Same face, same eyes, not aged a day, just smiling under a banner that read, "Blessing the Chosen." That's when it hit me. He hadn't left. He'd always been here, watching, waiting, and now he'd passed as part of the cycle to me. When I got back to the boarding house, the front door was wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. I knew I had locked it before I left. I remember turning the key, hearing the click inside. The air was dense with smoke, no fire, but the smell of scorched wood and something worse underneath, like burnt hair or dried blood. My room had been gutted, not ransacked gutted. Everything soft had been burned or torn apart. The mattress was gone, the bed sheets reduced to threads, even my spare clothes, melted zippers still clinging to the floorboards. But the worst was the wall. Someone had carved into it, deep and ragged, with what looked like fingernails or a rusted blade. The words were uneven, trembling, but unmistakable. The reaper walks when the dead is broken. Beneath it, my name was carved twice, once upright and once upside down. I stared at it for a long time, too long. It didn't feel like a threat, it felt like a prophecy someone was warning me I couldn't outrun. I ran to Milla's room, hoping, praying she'd somehow come back. That maybe I had imagined the doll in the empty bed. Her door was still shut, but this time there was a smear of something dark across the knob. I didn't touch it. I just stared. From inside, I could hear something low like a growl or a whisper layered over itself a dozen times. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet didn't move. That sound burrowed into me. It wasn't just noise that knew me, it pulsed, in time with my heartbeat, like it had wrapped itself around my ribs. I backed away slowly and turned to leave, but something stopped me at the stairs. A scarecrow smaller than the ones in the circle stood at the landing. Not straw. This one was made of clothes, my hiking boots, my spare jacket, even the camera strap I'd worn for years. Its face was stitched burlap with 2 holes carved to wide, and pinned to its chest was the sheet of paper Rowan had left. Me. One must carry. This time, I didn't take it. I couldn't bear to touch it. I left everything behind except for the one hard drive I'd managed to hide under a floorboard. The first night backup footage, untouched. I ran straight for the church, the only stone structure in the whole town. My logic, if you can call it that, was that maybe something real, something that wasn't part of the ritual, would be safer. It wasn't. The doors were open, inside. The pews had been cleared, replaced with hay bales and stalks of dried corn braided together into what looked like altars. Each had a nameplate. Most I didn't recognize, but one had my name, and underneath, a single Polaroid photo I hadn't taken me standing at the edge of the cornfield, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream I didn't remember making. The date in the corner read October 7th. That was tomorrow. Behind me, the bell tower began to chime, even though the sky was still bright. Not the night told this time, just a single, drawn-out clang, and then another, and another, each ring heavier than the last, each one shaking the walls. I ran out before the 6th. I didn't want to know how many there'd be. Back on the street, the town had changed, not physically but in feel. The storefronts were still there, the chapel still loomed, but the windows were all dark. No candles, no faces, no sound. It was as if the town had taken a breath and held it. I tried knocking on doors, screaming for help. Nothing. Even the dogs were gone. I ended up in the post office, which looked untouched. I found a landline there, one of those big beige phones with giant buttons. I picked it up. No dial tone, just a click. Then breathing, slow, heavy breathing, and the sound of wind brushing against corn leaves. And then a voice off, genderless, impossibly close. The reaper sees what you buried. I dropped the phone so fast it cracked the tile. When I looked out the window, the scarecrows were in the street now, standing in a line that stretched down both sidewalks. One of them had its hand raised, pointing directly at me. I don't know how I got back to the boarding house. It was all a blur. The sky was already dark, the moon so bright it lit the ground like snow. When I opened the front door again, the scarecrow in my clothes was gone. But now, pinned to the wall where it had stood, was a scrap of burlap stitched in black thread, 3 words: walk, witness, warn. And in that moment, I understood. I was never meant to stop this. I was meant to carry it, like Rowan had, like the others before me. I wasn't a documentarian. I was a messenger, the one who walks away to tell the story, the one who spreads the seed. I stumbled to my room, grabbed the drive, and left again through the back, into the woods, avoiding the roads, crawling on hands and knees to stay out of sight. The woods didn't fight me. They guided me, opened gaps between trees that hadn't been there before, showed me the dirt path that led to the highway. I followed it until I hit pavement, and kept walking until a truck finally stopped to pick me up hours later. The trucker who picked me up said I looked like I'd crawled out of a grave. I tried to explain about the festival, the missing people, the dolls, the fields, but the words wouldn't come right. I couldn't describe the Reaper without shaking. Every time I said Harvest Moon, my voice cracked like static, like something inside me didn't want me to speak. He nodded like he'd seen worse and offered me a bottle of water and a blanket from his back seat. I rode in silence, watching the dark trees blur by until we reached a gas station 20 miles out. He dropped me there, never asked for money, never asked my name, just said, "If you saw the red threads, you're lucky you made it out." Then he drove off without filling his tank. I never caught his plates, and I think now I wasn't meant to. I filed a report with the sheriff's department in the next county. They said they'd look into it, but their tone changed when I mentioned Merrill Creek. The deputy I spoke to muttered something to the guy next to him, then handed me a cup of coffee and said, "That place doesn't fall under our jurisdiction." When I asked who had it, he said the files were transferred years ago, state level. He wouldn't say more, wouldn't let me keep a copy of my own statement, just said they'd be in touch and walked away. I stayed at a roadside motel. That night, afraid to close my eyes. Every time I drifted off, I heard the bell, not out loud inside me, like an echo in my bones. When I woke up, there were husks scattered across the floor, not from corn, from dolls, tiny, handmade, faceless, one for each of us who had gone to the festival, and mine was missing. I mailed copies of the footage to 3 different people I trusted: my brother, an old professor, and a podcast host I'd worked with before. None of them responded. Their phones went to voicemail. Their emails bounced. I even drove to my professor's house. The mailbox was full. The lawn was overgrown. A neighbor told me she moved months ago, but I'd spoken to her just last week. The professor, not the neighbor. I double-checked the timestamp. It had vanished from my phone log. Just a gap, 1041 to 1052, blank, like something had snipped it out with scissors. My backup drives glitched too. Only the hard drive I carried, the one I'd hidden at first night, remained fully intact. Even then, some clips wouldn't play, and one folder regenerated every time I deleted it, offering _1983. I never created it, but it's there, every time, filled with images of the cornfield, sometimes with scarecrows, sometimes not. Sometimes with me in the background, watching myself from behind the stalks. I've tried to move on, change my name, change states. I don't publish anymore. I work under the table jobs, avoid full moons. But every October, just before the harvest moon, I get the same envelope, no return address, always postmarked from a town that doesn't exist. Inside, a single item. One year it was a scrap of red thread, another year it was a Polaroid of my motel room taken from the hallway window. The worst was last year, a burned corn husk doll wrapped in a child's bracelet. Milla's. I haven't opened this year's package. It's sitting in my glove compartment. I tell myself not to look. That opening, it makes it real again. But I can already feel the pull, like a thread winding tight around my ribs. I know what they want. I know I was never meant to escape. Not really. I was meant to carry the story, and now, telling it to you, that's just part of the toll. So if you've listened this far, if you're reading this now, then you felt it, haven't you? That tightness in your chest, that whisper when the wind brushes your ear. Maybe you've even seen the shadows in your hallway start to shift when the moonlight hits just right. Don't look too closely. Don't go near the cornfields. And whatever you do, don't say the name out loud. The Reaper's cycle is old. It feeds on memory, on stories passed down. And now that you've heard mine, you're part of it too. The harvest moon is almost here. Listen for the toll, count the bells, and if your name is called, don't run. It only makes him walk faster. I didn't want the house. That's the first thing I'll say, and I'll stand by it. I wasn't one of those people praying for a sudden inheritance to swoop in and save them. When my Uncle Lawrence passed, I didn't cry. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 10 years, not since I was a teenager. He was my dad's older brother, a cop who never really came back from the job, even after he quit the force. All I remembered about him was that he lived alone, kept a bunch of dusty VHS tapes in his basement, and mumbled to himself when he thought no one could hear. When the lawyer called to say I was the sole beneficiary of his estate, this old bedroom house on Maple Street, I thought it was a mistake, but it wasn't. My name was on the will. No contest. The house and everything inside it was mine. I should have known better than to take it, but rent was killing me, and the idea of living somewhere for free felt like a miracle. Looking back though, it wasn't a miracle. It was a setup. The house looked normal enough from the outside. Brick exterior, peeling paint around the windows. A sagging porch that gave with every step. The kind of house you'd expect to find on any tired little street in a fading town. But something felt off. Not haunted movie off. More like the kind of silence that comes after something terrible's already happened. Like walking into a room where someone's just been crying. I moved in on a Wednesday. I'll skip the boring stuff and packing, clearing out expired cans of soup, throwing away old medicine bottles, but one thing stuck with me from that first day. The basement door had 3 separate locks on it, to deadbolts and a padlock, and they weren't rusted or old. They were new, like someone had installed them recently, maybe even days before I got there. And when I asked the lawyer about it, he just said, the police investigation concluded. We're not allowed to comment further. That's when it hit me this wasn't just some sad old house. Something had happened here, something they'd tried to seal away. A few days later, I found the first tape. It wasn't hidden, just sitting on top of the refrigerator, inside, a cracked plastic case with no label. I almost tossed it, thinking it was some old home movie, but something made me hold on to it. I dusted off my uncle's old VHS player, thankfully still hooked up to the living room TV, and slid the tape in. The screen flickered to life with static, then cut to grainy footage of a hallway. My hallway, the same wallpaper, same light, fixture, same crooked floorboards, except in the video. The door at the end of the hall, the one that didn't exist in my version of the house, was open, and something was standing just inside it. Not moving, just there. I paused the tape and stared down the hall in real life. No door, just the blank wall I'd walked past every day since I moved in. I hit play again. The figure stepped forward. The tape cut to black. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept walking to the end of the hallway, pressing my hand against that wall, waiting to feel something give. It never did. Not that night. I told myself I was overreacting. That old tape must have been filmed in some other house. Maybe a rental my uncle had lived in before this one. The hallway just looked similar. That's what I wanted to believe anyway. So I threw myself into sorting through the rest of the house, trying to distract myself. Most of the upstairs was standard hoarder territory boxes of junk, years of unopened mail, old badge plaques and cop memorabilia. But when I finally unlocked the study, I found what looked like a small makeshift AV setup. A wall-mounted cork board held rows of scribbled notes pinned under yellowed thumbtacks. Each one had a date and a time range, followed by words like shifting again, visible from window, or do not watch. On the desk, I found a journal. No dates, just pages filled with lines of writing that started coherent and then dissolved into scratched symbols and frantic loops. One page in the middle was torn out cleanly. I found it stuffed into the drawer beneath a pile of blank VHS labels. That missing page just said one thing, written over and over again: it sees movement, not time. That phrase haunted me. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt it burrow behind my eyes like a splinter. A few days later, I found more tapes. They weren't in the basement, they were in the attic, tucked away behind old tax records and a water-damaged Christmas tree. There were at least 20 of them, most unlabeled, a few marked only with symbols. I took a chance and played one that had a black triangle drawn on the front. It started with the same hallway footage I'd seen before, only this time, the perspective slowly panned to the left and showed that impossible door again, except this time it was closed. And then, about 5 minutes into the static lace recording, the door swung open, fast and hard. Something stepped out tall, thin, human shape, but not human. The proportions were wrong. The elbows bent to high, the knees folded inward, and where its face should have been was just a patch of stretched skin. I pressed pause, heart racing, but the screen didn't freeze. The thing kept moving on pause, like it knew I was watching. It turned, slowly, and stared straight through the TV screen. Then the tape ejected itself. I didn't touch the remote, didn't move, just sat there with the hairs on my neck standing straight up, feeling like I'd just opened the door I wasn't meant to. The next morning, I found muddy footprints in the hallway, not shoe prints, bare feet, long, narrow, pointed at the toes, like someone had been walking on the balls of their feet. They started near the base of the staircase and stopped directly at the end of the hall, right where that door had appeared on the tape. I pressed my hand against the wall again, desperate now, half expecting it to feel warm or to pulse or vanish beneath my palm, but it didn't. It felt like any other wall, solid, dry, cold. I even knocked 3 times, like an idiot hand thought I heard something knock back. Not an echo, a delay, like something thinking before answering. I must have stood there for 20 minutes, waiting for it to do something else. When nothing did, I chalked it up to sleep deprivation. After all, I hadn't slept properly in days. My dreams were a mess of flickering lights and static hiss, always ending in that same hallway. Always with me opening a door that didn't exist, and every time I reached for the knob, I woke up to the sound of the VHS player rewinding itself, even when it wasn't plugged in. I called a contractor to see if maybe there was a door behind the wall. I framed it like a possible renovation project. He showed up 2 days later, took one look at the floor plan, and got real quiet. He pointed out that there was supposed to be a crawl space on that side of the house. According to the blueprints, it connected to an unused portion of the basement. Could be blocked off, he said. Old houses get weird. I asked him to open it up, knock through the drywall if he had to. He said sure, left to get tools from his truck, and never came back, just drove off. No call, no text, nothing. When I followed up later, the number he gave me was disconnected. That night, another tape appeared sitting on top of my pillow. I hadn't left the house. No one else had a key. This one was labeled in my uncle's handwriting. It read, Dio, not watch alone. I stared at it for hours. Didn't press play, just held it in my hand, wondering how it had gotten there, and why. Deep down, some part of me still wanted to watch it anyway. For a while, I convinced myself I was imagining it. I told myself stress was playing tricks on my mind, that I was just reacting to the isolation, the strangeness of living in someone else's space. But denial only lasted so long. The static was the first thing I couldn't rationalize away. It started in the middle of the night, just faint hissing, like an old TV left on in another room. Except every time I checked, nothing was playing. The VHS player would be off, the screen black, but the static still came, seeping out from under the locked basement door, snaking down the hall. I even thought I heard a voice underneath the noise, like someone trying to talk through a thick layer of snow. The words were garbled and slow, but one syllable repeated clearly, again and again. Open, open, open. I stood there at 3 a.m., hand on the doorknob, heart pounding in my ears. And I swear just before I walked away I heard it breathe. Not a gust, not a creak, a breath. Then things started moving. Not much at first, just little things. Books I'd stacked neatly would end up scattered on the floor. My shoes would be placed heel to toe beside the bed. Even though I always kicked them off near the front door, my toothbrush disappeared twice. The third time, it came back covered in ash. I started leaving small traps coins balanced on door handles, notebooks placed precisely to see if anything had shifted in every morning. I'd find them disturbed. Once, the notebook was gone entirely, and in its place was a VHS tape. I didn't even bother with the player that time. I left it outside in the trash, walked for blocks, and threw it in a public dumpster. That night, the tape was on my kitchen table when I got home. Same crack in the plastic, same smudged label. No note, no sign of forced entry, just that horrible familiarity, like the house was learning me, adjusting to my patterns, waiting for me to break the routine just enough for it to act. I started to notice changes in the architecture, too, subtle shifts. The hallway felt longer some days. The study door would be on the left one morning and on the right the next. I took photos, dozens of them, time-stamped, labeled, but when I would back through them, the layout was always the same, always normal, like the house was rewriting itself digitally, fixing what it had warped in real life. The one photo that did show something wrong was a blurred shot from my front-facing phone camera. I had taken it by accident while rushing down the stairs. In the background, almost invisible, unless you brighten the shadows, was a figure, peeking out from the end of the hall. Not in the hallway, in the wall, half submerged, like it was pushing forward through drywall, mouth wide like it was swallowing silence. I didn't show anyone. Who would believe me? I barely believed it, myself, but I deleted the photo anyway, and 2 hours later, it was back in my camera roll. Same time stamp, same angle, but this time, the figure was closer. The worst part was when I started losing time. It started with small gaps then, 20 minutes gone from my memory. Then, whole chunks of the day would vanish. I'd come to standing in a different room, staring at the TV, the screen playing nothing but static. Sometimes I'd find my own handwriting on sticky notes I didn't remember writing. Things like "don't sleep upstairs" or "don't follow it." Once, I woke up in the hallway closet, door locked from the outside, with a tape in my hand, and no idea how I got in there. My nails were dirty like I'd been digging. When I looked in the mirror, there were scratches across my ribs then, deliberate lines, like someone had tried to write something across my skin and been interrupted. I started keeping all the lights on, but even that didn't help. The shadows moved anyway. They'd creep up behind me in my reflection, lagging just half a second too slow. I stopped trusting mirrors altogether. I covered them in towels, nailed shut the medicine cabinet, because one night, when I glanced up while brushing my teeth, my reflection blinked, and I didn't. I started digging not because I wanted answers, but because I needed them. It wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was survival. I couldn't keep pretending things were normal when I'd wake up covered in dust, with my bed pushed into the hallway, or when the door at the end of the corridor showed up in my dreams, with a pulse of its own. So I drove to the local records office, the one tucked behind the city courthouse where the ceiling fans still squeak and the clerks act like every question is an attack. It took me hours to even find old property files. But when I finally pulled the deed history for the Maple Street house, my stomach dropped. Before my uncle, the house had gone through 9 owners in 40 years. 9, and every single one had sold the property less than 2 years after moving in. Some didn't even last 6 months. One owner was listed as presumed deceased missing. Person file 1988. When I requested the file, the clerk gave me a weird look, then handed me a form to sign. The page was already creased like someone had asked for it recently. The file was thin, too thin. Just a black and white photo of a woman's face, a scanned copy of a missing persons report, and a handwritten note paperclip to the back. Last known location inside residence. Approx. 11:40 p.m. Officer E. Brandt, responding unit never returned. That name stopped me cold. Brandt. That was my uncle's last name. I flipped through my uncle's old photo albums when I got home, dug through the junk drawers, scanned every faded label until I found her Ellen Brandt. She was his sister, my great-aunt, a patrol officer, apparently, and the last cop to enter this house during a domestic disturbance call in 2002. Except she never came out. That's what the note meant. My uncle hadn't bought this house. He had inherited it, just like I did. He took it after Ellen vanished, and if that timeline was right, he moved in after the investigation closed. He knew what the house was, and he lived here for over a decade anyway. That realization shook me to my core, because it meant that whatever was in the walls, whatever was behind that impossible door, was part of my family history. I dug deeper. My uncle's boxes of old tapes became my obsession. I cataloged them, digitized them, even watched them, with noise-canceling headphones and a notebook by my side. What I found was a slow descent not just in the house, but in his mind. The early recordings were simple, him testing out the camcorder, narrating changes in temperature, documenting anomalies like flickering lights and shifting sound directions. But by the 5th tape, his tone changed. He started whispering to the camera, leaving messages for whoever comes next. He talked about the room behind the wall, how it moves when it's being watched, how it listens. One night, he set the camera on a tripod at the end of the hall, aimed at the blank stretch of wall where the mystery door had appeared. He didn't say anything, just stood out of frame. For 6 hours, the tape ran, and at exactly 3:13 a.m., the drywall shimmered, just for a second, like heat waves on pavement, and then a faint outline formed a door frame, breathing in and out like lungs. I replayed that segment over and over, frame by frame. It wasn't a glitch, it was real. I took one of the tapes to a former AV professor I trusted, someone who owed me a favor and didn't ask too many questions. I told him it was part of a horror short I was working on. He ran it through restoration software, enhanced the contrast, and froze on the same frame I'd been obsessing over. When he looked up from the screen, his face had gone pale. "This isn't post-production," he said. "This isn't added after. This thing was in camera." Then he asked me, very carefully, where the footage was shot. I told him I couldn't say. He nodded once, unplugged the hard drive, and handed it back without another word. I haven't heard from him since. His number stopped working a week later. I searched his name online, but there was no trace, not even a staff listing at the university. He was just gone, like he'd been redacted from reality itself. That's when I started writing everything down, not just for me but for you, for whoever's next, because I don't think this house wants me to understand it. I think it wants me to finish something that started with Ellen Brandt and ended in silence. I stopped sleeping altogether around this point, not because I wanted to, but because the house made it impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd wake up somewhere new on the floor, in the hallway, sometimes sitting in the basement stairwell with a lit candle I didn't remember lighting. My phone recorded voice memos in the night long, static laced, tracks with my voice layered beneath something else, something that clicked and hissed between syllables. I played one back during daylight just to prove to myself I wasn't losing it, and heard myself say, "Don't follow it when it crawls. It wants to be remembered." I don't remember saying that. I don't remember ever pressing record. But the file was there, clear as anything, time-stamped at 4:44 a.m. that same night. I found deep scratches across the inside of the front door from the inside. The marks weren't random either. They formed letters, a word. It said, "Watch." And then, just below it, freshly gouged and still flaking, were 5 tallies. 5. One for each tape I'd watched. The hallway had started to stretch. Literally, I measured it. From the base of the stairs to the far wall used to be about 22 feet. One morning, it measured nearly 30. The next day, 17. Then back to 22. The floorboards creaked in different places every night. Sometimes the lights would flicker, and I'd see movement, not a shadow, but depth. Like the hallway had folded inward, creating a space I couldn't see but could feel. And the door, the one that wasn't supposed to exist, had started humming. Not a sound you could catch with a mic or a recorder, but a pressure, a low vibration in the teeth, behind the eyes, like the moment before a migraine hits. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall and thought I heard footsteps not behind the wall, but inside it, circling in a slow, dragging rhythm. And then, just once, a knock. One single knock from the other side. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. I just backed away until my calves hit the opposite wall. That was the first time I vomited from fear. It wouldn't be the last. I started bleeding from places I shouldn't have. My nose, sure, that came first. But then my gums, my ears. Once, I woke up with blood pooled around my navel, like something had tried to claw its way out from the inside. Doctors couldn't explain it. I saw the specialists, who both said it might be stress-related rupture or sleepwalking injuries, but they didn't see what I saw. The marks weren't random. They were repetitions, patterns that mimicked the symbols from my uncle's notebook. Swirls and long vertical lines. I kept scrubbing them off in the shower only to find them again the next day, darker, more precise, and sometimes they would itch a deep, under the skin itch that no amount of scratching could stop. I began to think the house wasn't hurting me. It was riding on me, tagging me like it was preparing me for something, for entry, for replacement, or worse, for an audience that didn't blink. The basement became a war zone. I'd boarded it shut, reinstalled new locks, even nailed wooden planks across the door. But one night, I woke up to find all the boards stacked neatly beside the couch. The locks were gone, removed without a trace. The door stood wide open. I stared down into the darkness and felt something look back. I didn't go down. Not that time, but something had definitely come up. I found damp footprints on the living room carpet, small at first, like a child's, then larger and larger, until they looked like mine but spaced wrong, like someone was walking with their knees twisted sideways. I checked the door frame for prints, for dirt, anything, but there was nothing. The basement itself didn't smell like mold anymore. It smelled like iron, like blood and old coins and the kind of air you taste before a storm. I've lived through hurricanes. I know that pressure, that anticipation, that moment when everything holds its breath before something hits. That's what the house was doing. It was holding its breath, waiting for me to go down those stairs again, and I knew, next time, it wouldn't just be a visit, it would be a crossing. I started researching ways to stop hauntings. I know how that sounds, but when you're that far in, when the walls of your house shift around you like they're breathing, you'll try anything. I made salt lines across every threshold, burned sage in every room, whispered protective chants I barely understood. For one night, it felt like something changed. The static stopped. The hallway felt normal. Even the air had that still, untouched quality of an empty house. I thought I'd won. I even left a message on my friend Jordan's voicemail saying, I might come visit, get away for a while, just breathe. But when I woke up the next morning, all the salt was gone. Not scattered, not disrupted, gone, vanished. The bowls I'd set on the windowsills were shattered, each one broken into perfect quarters. like someone had deliberately crushed them with exact pressure. The worst part, there were bite marks in the rim of one of the broken bowls, human-shaped, but too wide for any normal mouth, as if someone or something had tried to eat its way through the protection I laid down. I tried leaving, actually leaving. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out the front door without looking back. Made it 3 blocks before I realized I wasn't walking on sidewalks anymore. I was walking on wood. I turned around, and I was back in the hallway. Same rug, same crooked floorboard near the end. My bag was gone. My shoes were dry. I dropped to my knees and screamed, not because I was trapped. I already suspected that, but because the house had let me think I could leave. It had watched me go, let me believe in escape, and then brought me back without effort. That's when I started planning the fire. I bought gas cans, 6 of them, stored them in the shed out back, and waited for the next night I felt strong enough. I was going to torch every wall, every piece of furniture, every memory. I was halfway through soaking the carpets when I heard the VCR power on. I hadn't touched it. The TV lit up by itself, and there I was on screen pouring gasoline. But the footage wasn't from a camera. It was from the ceiling, from above me, from a spot where no camera had ever been. I stood there, paralyzed, watching myself move in real time. Not a delay, not a loop, real time. I raised my hand. The screen showed the same. I stepped left. The screen followed. And then something else stepped in the frame behind me. It looked like me, wore my clothes, moved like I did, but its face was blurry, wrong, like someone had taken my features and stretched them over a skull that didn't quite fit. I spun around, expecting to see it, but there was no one, just the empty hallway. I looked back at the screen, and it was still there, standing behind my on-screen twin, grinning, and slowly raising its hand to wave. I screamed, dropped the gas can, and ran out the front door. But instead of my yard, I found myself in the basement. No transition, no steps, just the snap of a cutscene. One moment I was running for air. The next I was standing in the dark, in front of that door, the real one, the one that had never been there, and now it was open just a crack, and from inside came a low voice that sounded like mine, only older, deeper, saying, "Come finish what he started." That's when I knew the house wasn't haunted. It was hungry, and it had chosen me. I never did burn the house. I don't think it would have mattered. Fire can destroy walls, sure, but it can't destroy whatever this thing is. I started to realize that it wasn't the house that held the evil. It was just one entry point, a doorway, maybe even a lure, something far older, far bigger, was using this place as a face. And now that it had mine, it didn't need the rest of it anymore. I moved out the day I woke up to find all the tapes gone. Everyone. The shelves were bare. Even the backups I had hidden in a lockbox under the bed gone. In their place was a single Polaroid resting face down. When I turned it over, it was a picture of me sleeping, but not from the angle of my room. It had been taken from above. The timestamp in the corner read 4:40 for AM, the same time the audio recordings used to start. There was something in the picture with me, too. A shape standing just outside the edge of the mattress. I didn't scan it, didn't show anyone. I buried it in the crawl space beneath a motel 60 miles away and haven't gone back since. But the house isn't finished. Not really. Sometimes, when I check the street view online, the hallway is visible through the upstairs window. I've counted the lights, the slats and the blinds. It's the same hallway. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see something standing in it. Not facing out, but turned inward, like it's waiting for someone to come home. I've gotten emails from burner accounts, pictures of walls that look like mine, of old TV sets showing static with a single word in the center, watch. They always arrive between 3 and 4 a.m. I blocked the senders, changed my accounts, even moved states, but it doesn't stop. Last week, a box showed up on my new porch, no label, no return address, just one thing inside, a tape, blank label, no markings. I haven't watched it. I won't, but I still keep it, because some nights, the wind outside hums like a VCR, and I know if I throw it away, the door will come back. I can't tell you to believe me. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but I can tell you this. If you find an old house with a missing owner, with journals full of static and shelves full of blank tapes, leave. Don't explore it. Don't try to fix it. Don't even step inside, because I think the house doesn't haunt people. It copies them. It makes something in their shape, in their voice, and once it has your shape, It doesn't need you anymore. You become one of the names scratched into the basement stairs, or the whisper in someone else's hallway. And if you're lucky, really lucky, you'll only ever show up in someone else's dream. But if you hear your own voice on tape, saying something you never said before, it means it's already looking through your eyes. It's been 6 months since I left Maple Street. I sleep in hotel rooms now. Different one every week. I don't use credit cards. I stopped talking to friends, family, anyone who might be traced back to me. Because 2 weeks ago, I got a letter, real paper, folded neatly. It was slid under the door sometime after the AM. No postage, no name, just one sentence written in my uncle's handwriting. You're facing the wrong door. I read it once, burned it in the sink, but now I keep a mirror by the bed, not to look at myself, just to make sure my reflection blinks when I do.